rarely do you go, okay, I'm going to look at some art and I want to look at their bad stuff. As artists, we all have strengths and weaknesses. And I think for myself personally, what I've always aimed for, whenever I identify a weakness, I'll work out a way to practice either, so if it's sheep, that's probably been a little weakness of mine over the years. For some reason, my sheep tend to look a little bit more like polar bears, not so much like a sheep. So to help remedy that, I would photograph some good ones, that classic newly shorn sheep, and draw. Because a lot of times it is getting that characteristic of the object that you're painting and whether you've done it convincing enough. And that's where I think this lesson will really come to help. When I first started, I would find a great artist and think, oh, every single thing they do is magnificent. But as you get better and better, and we do need to be a little or quite self-critical of our own work, but also of the great artists, the great living artists, the deceased artists, any good or great tradesperson with their paintings. So with that, here I have a Robert Johnson. He was a New Zealand-born painter, but what is interesting with Robert's work is, I was told many years ago that when you see a really good Robert Johnson, your new times are a little tough. So he probably was, I believe from the story, kind of would get a little complacent every now and then. And so there's always different reasons. Some artists experiment heaps. So that's where they're trying lots of different things and they're trying to push themselves into different artistic areas, where there's other artists, they'll, especially say in the 60s, 70s and 80s, probably even into the 90s, there'd be paintings or subjects that'd be just sort of a classic Australian eucalypt gum tree, or beach scenes or river scenes, street scenes. They would just specialise in one, and you could kind of get away with that. But where I think Robert sometimes, he was prone to not as strong painting or execution, where I think this one is an absolute favourite. Just that atmosphere in the background, the use of colour, it's almost a reddy, pinky purple, and that's the foliage colour. But then coming right up into the where there's the little bit of an orchard, and we've also got the groupings of little buildings there. Probably the only little weakness, I think, is the fence line running in. It may be just a fraction too strong. He may have been able to just break that in one or two places, and that would have helped with the that direction line. But so if we flip to the next one, this one looks like it's in the Pittwater, which is on the northern beaches of Sydney. Robert Johnson, even though he was born in New Zealand, I believe he came to Australia in his mid to late 20s, and I think probably saw that it was a great challenge. Australia, we probably had and probably still do have a few more really good painters, so it's nothing like putting yourself into a competitive situation to get the best out of you. Composition-wise, I think it's a little too busy. Colour-wise, I think the colours, and this is probably a little darker than it should be. Sometimes I'm sure some of those darks aren't as dark as that, but I think, even though he's got that circular motion of the branches to keep you in that area, which is a good compositional device, but it's just one of those ones that you can almost guess on that day he was putting in all of his effort. There's some great painting in the painting, but I think as a whole doesn't quite hold together. Now I have an American painter. I actually didn't research, but Hans Putoff, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. I've got a strong feeling he's one of the Californian Impressionists, probably of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, that era. And this is one, and I believe he did a lot of plein air work. And this is one that you almost sort of think, you know what, he either kind of didn't quite get finished, or it was just a small painting. And a good way to tell the size of a painting is the size of the artist's signature, even though that's just being cropped out of the bottom. But if you see the diagonal lines of the tree trunks, that's just a little too repetitious. Then we have the angled of the background mountain. We've probably got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different diagonal lines. And even though he's got good colour and light in the foreground, I don't think it holds together as well as this one, where this one has magnificent distance. It's just a marvellous use of light. And I think Putoff was really an excellent colourist. And I think that's one area that he did experiment quite a bit with as well. He's employed the sort of the zigzagging or S-shaped composition. We've got good depth with the rocks in the foreground, and then just the rolling shapes of the foliage. That just leads you nicely into that marvellous backdrop. I only really found his work probably about 6 or 7 years ago, so it's not an artist that I've been able to see any in real life, and I'm guessing and imagining that they're even more spectacular in real life. A lot of colorists, that's one of the great difficulties with being a colorist, is most cameras or printing presses, they just can't match the blues, the reds, the yellows, that vibrancy, especially if there's a great contrast as well. This gentleman is a British painter, Stanley Royle, R-O-Y-L-E. I had never heard of him before. He was one of those lovely sort of finds where you see an image and you think, oh, that to me looked a bit reminiscent of the Glasgow school actually, but he's a British painter, and I believe this painting was mistaken for one of the Glasgow boys, probably most likely of that same era, so I could understand. And there is a little bit of a stylistic similarity, but just a marvellous painting. He's got all the geese just to arrange those, and I'm almost guessing he would have had to have painted all of them, most of them individually. Just really well handled, great composition, great use of light. It just is a gem. I would actually love to see this one in person, and I believe it's in an art gallery in Ireland. So I'll have to, next time I get to Ireland, I'll have to see if I can swing by that way. Where this is another one of Stanley Royle's paintings, and as you can see, it's got a super strong horizon line, which is just going to cut, even though it's not in half, thankfully, but it just cuts the painting 2/3, 1/3. With a little bit of research that I was able to do, he did do a few trips to Canada, which I'm not sure if he had relatives there, or as a lot of artists, we do have a great sense of adventure. So whether he just went off exploring, and I believe this is quite a famous rocky outcrop in Canada, not possibly even Nova Scotia region. I have seen it before. That's why when I saw the painting, I thought, oh, I recognise the subject. A little more stylised, and that's the tricky part. Sometimes when you're judging something, we always need to have the basics of composition, use of colour, use of the brush implements or knife implements. There's a checklist, almost like a gymnastics competition, where there is a little bit of technicality to it, but there's also a lot of artistry and flair and confidence that goes in. So and that's how I like to judge, and don't mind being judged with my own paintings, to be perfectly honest there. So that's one of the main concerns. The foreground doesn't quite tie into the background, even though there's a lot of good little areas when you take, say, a little grouping of those rocks. I think, you know what, that's a great little passage. And that's what can happen with paintings. Quite often I've finished a painting day thinking, you know what, I've given it all I can, and something's been bugging me, and I've done every little trick to flip it, have a break, you name it, come back with a fresh eye, do the mirror reverse, do it upside down, even sometimes turn them upside down, and you still can't fathom what you're doing wrong. And sometimes the painting, it will have good painting in it, but not enough, and not a big enough percentage to outweigh the weaknesses. This is one of my favourite, and probably one of my 5 most influential painters on my work. And it's interesting, he only lived to the age of 52, Harold Herbert. And I believe actually I found out by accident was actually a serial killer in California, but I think they put his middle name in, and that is definitely different, but that was a little bit of a surprise. But Harold Herbert, born in approximately 1891, and I believe he's passed away in 1945, so it might have been 1893, but I've never seen an oil painting, so just about every single bit of his work is watercolour on site, great splash of light, bit of technicality with the drawing. We have the boat there, the guy maybe a little bit up out of the boat. He possibly was down further, but Herbert might have thought, oh geez, once I have him sitting down on the seat, he looks too small compared to the boat. So he may have taken a bit of artistic license. With this one, it almost looks like he didn't quite finish the background. Either that was a artistic decision or not, but it's just such a lovely movement to that diagonal tree in that mid-distance. And really, when you think he's put the main area of information right in the middle, but because he's got the end of both boats, the little bit of the framework of where he's tying the boat up, and that nice movement with the foliage. So to me, with the light, the colour, the movement, that's a classic Harold Herbert. Where this one, I think this might have been just a super fast little sketch. Herbert was prone to actually over-engineering his work. He was such a marvellous draftsman that he would actually, in his early work, up to about 1928, he would almost over-engineer it. So when you're looking at Herbert's work, I try to, or you can almost pick them from 1928 to about 1938. That's when he was his little golden period, and he was a star of Australian art. Just when the Heidelberg School, the Streetons, McCubbins, Roberts, Condors, that early school, Herbert, Robert Johnson, there was a group of younger artists that were carrying the name on, and Herbert was quite a star in his day. He was very good friends with a gentleman who eventually became our longest serving Prime Minister, Robert Menzies, so he was in the know. And I'm not sure what year this one is painted, but it's got some of Herbert's little magic, a little bit in the foreground, a little bit in the foliage. The sky's really lovely, but it's just a little empty and open. And actually with that, this was a really tough task because one, I'm trying to choose high quality artists, and the better the artists, or that they had fewer and fewer weaker paintings or weaker areas. So, and rarely do you go, okay, I'm going to look at some art and I want to look at their bad stuff. It is healthy, it is good to do that, but I actually didn't realise how hard it was going to be. It took me actually quite a while, which is a great thing. So we'll just then move on to an English favourite of many people around the world, Edward Seago. I reckon this one was probably just a little study in Venice. There was probably the little grouping of boats and buildings, but I think with the mast of the central boat being right in the middle, kind of does cut it in lefts and rights. But the little boat, smaller boat to its left, that's really well handled. The boat's on the right, and the buildings are well handled, but I don't think it ties together. We've got the sail there that's kind of zipping the eye out as well, and that's a bit of a concern. And it looks like he didn't quite handle the mast because it kind of almost goes to a point. And he's done quite a few boat scenes, which that's my next one, where this one, just a spectacular sky, almost classic Seago sky. Fantastic grouping of boats. He has such simplification, but they look quite sophisticated as well. And I think that's what I love with Seago's work. He used almost the surface of his board, almost, which looks a rough board. You can see quite a bit of the texture coming through, and he used that to great effect to make his paintings look at a higher degree of difficulty. Just a lovely little play of light. And interesting fact, which I only really recently had confirmed, the painter John Alfred Arnsby Brown, that was Seago's teacher or one of his main influences. And when you see Arnsby Brown's work, you think, oh boy, that's so noticeable. And it only just struck me about 2 years ago, and I thought, well, you know what, that is quite similar. And voila, he was actually trained by Arnsby Brown, and I think I always love, and I think I'm drawn to the British painters that paint the light quite sort of strong and powerfully, and definitely Seago, Arnsby Brown, Trevor Chamberlain, and David Curtis too are probably not so well known for his powerful light effects, but still does get a beautiful light. So let's then move on. And I think of the whole grouping, this was one of the hardest ones for me to find. And I don't really like to call them a bad painting. More it's an undeveloped, or it might be just a little flawed, where this one's more probably, it looks a small one. You can see Edgar Payne's name down the bottom. So it's in its fairly big writing, so it's only a small painting. But technically, compositionally, I think it's great. There's nothing really too concerning, but she just looks a little flat in light, and the foreground doesn't quite, the shapes aren't quite convincing enough. And I don't think he's placed his darkest up against his lightest as well enough to really capture the light. And once again, there's quite a few strong diagonals there, and that's quite a bit to be concerned with, especially when painting mountains, because from the top of the mountain to the bottom, there's only one way down, really. They're normally either sheer cliffs or an angled. So, and you've got to try and get the viewer's eye down to the ground level, the horizon level. For me, this is a classic Edgar Payne. The big, magnificent sky, the light, the shadow. He's got that lovely, and it's very simplified, really, when you think of it, but there's still quite a bit in it. He's got that great light, shadow, and he's played the horses, the little horses, up against that shadow, splash of light in the foreground. But for me, it's all about the cliff face and just that dynamic sky. We would probably call it a thunderstorm rolling in, but I think from Gabor, Zvarik, they call it a monsoon, which is more sort of a different area of the world. But yeah, just a lovely scene, and Edgar Payne's work is so strong, and I think that to me is the sign of a super duper artist, and just someone so consistent. Now we move on to Elliot Gruna. This is about 5 foot by 4 foot, so it's a big painting, and Gruna even painted his earlobes with the light coming through. You almost need to see that in person at the Art Gallery in New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. Definitely put it on your to-do list if you're coming to Sydney. But no, just a great little grouping of cows, nice movement with the little pink flowers. If anything, probably lacking a little bit in colour, but it's that morning light. Morning light normally is more transitional with cooler, and we get warmer to the afternoon and probably to our sunset. Not always, but possibly just as a general rule. So here's another painting by Gruna. I almost didn't think this was a Gruna, so I'm guessing this was a fairly early one. If we take the tree, even though cows in Australia, when it gets dry, they will start to eat the leaves off the trees. I'm not sure if this happens in other parts of the world. So it will look like someone's come through with a hedge trimmer and trimmed the bottom of the tree off, or it grows in an unusual manner. But no, normally it's the cows or horses or the livestock. But he's even got a cow that's almost standing on top of another cow just to the left of the tree trunk. Some of the individual cows are well painted. There's good light throughout the painting, but that background's not really organised shape-wise. The drawing on the tree trunk is excellent, a little stark, and just lacking in his later work, I believe, or more developed work. And he's almost got it like a triangle, so it's almost like a bonsai tree as well. So here we come to probably the most influential artist on my work, Sir Arthur Streeton, born in Geelong, Melbourne. He spent about 18 years living in England and travelling through Italy and Egypt and quite a few areas of France and Italy and Belgium and Canada, America a little bit. So this was a very early one, and it was said that he had the genius of youth, but he's kind of repeated, so that background headland, the headland in the middle is almost the same shape. The eye sort of looking to the boat first, but then it's not being led to too many other areas. And if Streeton did have a weakness, it possibly was with his composition. Sometimes he would have directional lines that were probably a little too strong or not strong enough. So yeah, and he did have a slight stiffness to his paintings, where a contemporary Charles Conder, who I believe was quite a big influence, helped teach him to get that lyrical nature, to get the eye to move around the scene quite a bit better. And Streeton did do quite a bit of his work on site, and he said, I believe in his own words, which I have read in one of his books, that he only ever really liked or loved 1 in 10. And when you think possibly one of the top 10 great landscape painters of all time, so it kind of puts our effort, our modest effort, mine and all of our modest efforts into context. You can actually, if you're ever in the Alpine region of Victoria, there's Albany, the Kiewa Valley. This is the Murray River, Australia's greatest, longest river. This is kind of in the upper reaches. It would have been in sort of June, July, September, maybe October at the latest, when the snow was still there. There's quite a bit of snow there. So I would say it was more of a winter scene, the middle of our year. But just that lovely, you can see how his composition improved. He got that lovely movement, S-shape coming through there. Excellent light, beautiful work on the snow-capped mountains. He really was a bit of a genius. Once again, a lot of his paintings are quite big, and I do highly recommend you, if you can, chasing them down to be able to see them in person. Just keep at it, keep inspired. That's why the internet has probably been the artist's greatest tool and greatest gift that we could be given. I remember when it first came out, I was jumping onto art galleries in 97, 98, 99. The internet speeds were very slow and not many people had websites, but it is just so important to even ask yourself the question, what's making this painting work and what's hurting this painting? Because every shape, brush mark can either help us or hurt us. So it's good to analyse that. And that's when we file away, oh, Streeton used lovely blue in the background and the yellows in the foreground. That's how we created depth. There's a concept, there's an idea, there's an approach to painting that we just file away, and you just never know if and when you'll ever use it. So thanks for watching. It has been a great pleasure. All the best. Bye for now.